Ethan Parker wasn't looking for love, just a quick coffee and an easy exit. A blind date set up by his friend? Not his thing. But then Emily walked in. No flashy clothes, no curated smiles, just authenticity. And suddenly Ethan's exit strategy vanished. She didn't laugh at his status or flirt with his power. She talked about books, stories, real things. And for the first time, Ethan, the guy who usually dates models, listened. Not to impress, but because he cared. But everything shattered when Emily discovered the truth. The date had started as a joke. She disappeared. No texts, no calls. That's when Ethan changed. He didn't chase her with grand gestures. He wrote letters, remembered the details, and showed up, not to win her back, but to show her who he'd become. Sometimes it's not about finding the perfect person. It's about being humbled by someone who sees through your mask and choosing to become better. Because the right story doesn't start with perfection. It starts with honesty.
When Ethan Parker walked into the softly lit cafe in downtown Seattle, he wasn't nervous. He was calculated, controlled. The type of guy who always knew his next move in business and life, and usually in love. Or so he thought. That evening was supposed to be routine forgettable even. His best friend had insisted on setting him up on a blind date with a girl described only as kind and not your type. But trust me, man, she's good for you. Ethan had rolled his eyes at the pitch. Kind was code for boring, and not your type usually meant, well, everything he actively avoided. Still, the promise of good espresso and the chance to say, "I told you so" over drinks later, pushed him out the door. It's easy to dismiss something or someone when you've spent your entire life being praised for your taste. Ethan had built a reputation around having high standards, fast cars, faster deals, and carefully curated dates with picture-perfect women who looked flawless in selfies but never quite knew what to say beyond them. In his world, appearances weren't everything. They were the only thing. Until that night, sitting in the far corner of Luma Bean Cafe, a local spot with warm wood paneling and the low hum of acoustic jazz spilling from the speakers, Ethan had already mapped out his escape. He'd fake a call from a client, say something about a Q4 meeting, and be out the door before his date could order her chai latte. That was the plan, clean, efficient, superficial, just like always. But then she walked in. Her name was Emily Carter. No big entrance. No flashy outfit or designer bag. She wore a soft navy sweater over a simple dress and a pair of well-worn boots that said she'd walk through life with stories worth telling. Her auburn hair was swept casually over one shoulder, her posture upright but not stiff, confident but not in the way Ethan was used to. There was a presence about her, not loud, not demanding, just unmistakably real. Ethan almost didn't recognize her from the tiny photo his friend Logan had shown him. In the image, she'd been squinting into the sun, hair tucked under a beanie, no makeup. It had given nothing away, but in person, she was magnetic. Not because of some filtered beauty or airbrushed glow, but because she seemed grounded, entirely unapologetically herself. As she approached the table, Ethan stood too fast and nearly knocked over his coffee. "Emily," he asked, voice unsure for the first time that evening. "Ethan," she replied with a calm smile. "Nice to finally meet you." They shook hands. Her grip was firm, not dainty, not trying to impress, just honest. And in that moment, something shifted. You see, real connection doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Often it catches you off guard. That's the thing with judgment. We rely on shortcuts, photos, labels, stereotypes. We swipe left on what we don't understand. We assume things about people because it's faster than asking questions. Ethan was no different. He'd made his assumptions before Emily even walked through the door. But that night, he was forced to face just how shallow those assumptions had been. As they sat down, the conversation began like most first dates, a little stiff, a little polite. Favorite music where they grew up, what they did for work. But unlike other dates, Emily didn't try to perform. She didn't giggle at his every joke or ask him about his bank account or favorite vacation spot. Instead, she talked about literature, how stories shape the way we see ourselves. She spoke about editing manuscripts for a small publishing house, about the thrill of discovering a voice that needed to be heard. Ethan found himself leaning in not out of obligation, but genuine curiosity. He asked her questions, and more importantly, he actually listened. Midway through their date, Emily said something that hit him harder than he expected. You know, people tend to make up their minds about you before you even say a word. I used to try and change that. Now I just let them. Because the ones who matter, they'll take the time to look closer. That sentence stayed with him. And here's the thing. We've all been both versions of Ethan and Emily at some point in our lives. We've judged too quickly. And we've been misjudged, underestimated, ignored. There's something universal about feeling like you don't fit someone's mold, like you're only visible once you've been filtered through their expectations. I remember a friend from college, Jenna, who struggled with this constantly. Brilliant writer, shy as a mouse in group settings. She once told me if I were louder, if I wore makeup, if I dressed a certain way, maybe I'd be noticed more. But what she didn't realize at the time was that the right people would notice her for exactly who she was. And they did. She now runs her own editorial agency and gives TED Talks on storytelling and authenticity. The same girl who once thought she wasn't enough. Ethan started realizing that night that maybe the reason his previous dates hadn't worked wasn't because of them. It was because he hadn't been open. He was always looking for someone to fit a role, not someone to challenge it. And Emily, she was rewriting the whole script. Their date ended not with a rushed goodbye or awkward hug, but a walk through the city under the streetlights. The conversation had shifted from light to layered. They talked about fear, hers of being seen only as average, his of being loved for the wrong reasons. Vulnerability replaced charm. And somewhere between jokes and silences, something real took root. But every story has a twist. A few days later, Ethan's best friend Logan, the one who set them up casually, mentioned the original bet. That Ethan had only agreed to the date because he thought it'd be funny to meet someone outside his type. Logan hadn't meant harm. He thought it was all a joke. But when Emily found out, everything unraveled. She went silent, didn't answer his calls, unread texts. Her absence echoed louder than any rejection Ethan had ever faced. That's when the script flipped. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't trying to win a girl, he was trying to undo a mistake, to prove he wasn't who he used to be. That what had started as a shallow agreement had become something deeply meaningful. He wrote her letters, waited outside her workplace, not in desperation, but in quiet hope. Left notes with her favorite coffee, quoting the book she'd mentioned that night. One said, "You told me stories reveal truth. I didn't know mine was still being written until I met you." It wasn't about grand gestures or apologies. It was about consistency, integrity, effort. Eventually, she agreed to meet him again. cautious but open, and that's when the real story began. Have you ever had a moment where pretending led to something unexpectedly real? Please comment below and like this video. If you believe the best love stories start with honesty, subscribe our channel now for more powerful story-based videos every day. The second time Ethan and Emily sat across from each other at Luma Bean Cafe, the atmosphere felt completely different. Gone was the playful curiosity of that first night. In its place was something heavier, the weight of disappointment, of broken trust hanging in the space between them, like thick fog. Emily's eyes were calm, but her expression was guarded. So she said, her voice, "Even you wanted to talk." Ethan nodded slowly, fidgeting with the sleeve of his shirt. "Yeah, I needed to say something. Actually, a lot of things." She didn't rush him. That was the thing about Emily. Even in her hurt, she made space for honesty. "I messed up," he began, voice low but steady. "When Logan first brought up the idea, I thought it was harmless. Just a coffee date, a story to laugh about later. But the moment you walked into this cafe, everything changed. I saw you, not just your face, but who you are. And I realized how blind I've been." Emily didn't respond immediately. She studied him, weighing his words not by their elegance, but by their sincerity. "You know," she said softly, "people don't realize how exhausting it is to constantly be underestimated. To be someone people see as less than just because you don't fit their ideal." Ethan's heart sank. It wasn't just about one date. It was about all the moments leading up to it, all the years she'd spent proving she was more than a label, and he had unknowingly contributed to that hurt. "I know sorry isn't enough," he said, "but I need you to know you changed something in me. You made me want to be better." And that was the truth. We often think change comes from grand life events, a job loss, a major move, a tragedy. But more often than not, it starts with a person. One interaction that forces you to reevaluate everything you thought you knew. For Ethan, Emily was that catalyst, the mirror that showed him not just who he was, but who he could become. That evening didn't end with a promise or a dramatic kiss. It ended with something much more powerful, a willingness to start over from scratch. No illusions, no expectations, just two people willing to try again. And this time they didn't rush it. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Emily spent time getting to know each other without the pressure of labels or romantic obligation. They went for walks, browsed bookstores, grabbed coffee at offbeat places. Ethan met her in her world, not the world of sleek restaurants and cocktail parties, but the quieter, richer world of handwritten notes, indie novels, and thoughtful pauses. One weekend, they volunteered together at a community book drive, an idea Emily had suggested. Watching her interact with strangers, helping kids pick out books with a sparkle in her eye, Ethan felt something shift again. This wasn't about making up for a mistake anymore. This was about appreciation. Deep, unfiltered appreciation. They'd sit in the park after long days and talk about everything and nothing. Childhood dreams, their biggest fears, the people who had shaped them. Emily spoke of her late grandmother, a school librarian who taught her that books were the safest place to hide when the world felt too loud. Ethan talked about growing up in a family that measured worth in accolades and appearances, and how exhausting it had been to always wear the mask of perfection. One night, Emily asked him a question that stayed with him for days. If no one could see you, I mean truly see you, what kind of life would you build for yourself? It was such a simple question, but it cracked something open inside him. He'd spent years performing the perfect investor, the perfect date, the perfect man. But with Emily, he was just Ethan. No branding, no curated image, just a guy trying to learn how to love in a real way. Their connection deepened not through grand romantic gestures, but through consistency, through mutual vulnerability, through shared silences that said more than words ever could. And slowly, Emily began to let her guard down again. Real-life relationships, the kind that last, aren't built on chemistry alone. They're built on trust earned through actions. They're tested in quiet moments in small decisions, like when Ethan remembered to bring her favorite jasmine tea on a rainy day. Or when Emily texted him a quote from a book she thought he'd love, not because she had to, but because she wanted him to see the world the way she did. Eventually, Ethan decided it was time to tell his friends, all of them, about Emily. Not with some casual, "oh, I'm seeing someone," but with intention. At a friend's rooftop gathering, he introduced her confidently. "Everyone, this is Emily," he said, placing a hand gently on her back. "And if you haven't had the chance to talk to her yet, you're missing out." There was a moment of stunned silence. The Ethan they knew had never looked so grounded, so proud of someone else. Later that evening, his friend Logan pulled him aside. "Okay," he said, glancing over at Emily, who was in the middle of a passionate book discussion with another guest. "I get it now." "She's amazing," Ethan smiled. "Yeah, she is." Logan looked sheepish. "I never should have called it a joke. That was on me." Ethan nodded. "We were both wrong, but at least I got lucky enough to fix it." The beauty of the story lies in that word fix. Because here's the thing, some mistakes can't be erased, but they can be repaired. And sometimes those repairs lead to stronger foundations than anything built perfectly the first time. Months passed. Their relationship grew not through fairy tale moments, but through real-life tests, work stress, miscommunications, personal insecurities. But they faced them together. One evening, while Emily was closing up her bookstore, Ethan showed up with a small bouquet of wildflowers and a nervous smile. "I was wondering," he said, placing the flowers on the counter, "if you'd come with me this weekend. My parents are hosting a small get-together, and I want them to meet the woman who's changed my life." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? I don't exactly fit the image your parents probably have in mind." He shook his head, smiling. "That image doesn't matter anymore. You're the only thing that feels real in all of this." She stared at him, studying his face, the weight behind the words. Then she smiled. "Then I'd love to go." And that's when Ethan realized love, the kind that changes you, doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't ask you to be someone else. It sees you for who you are, flaws, wounds, growth, and all, and stays anyway. The same cafe where their story began eventually became their regular spot. Every Sunday morning, they'd meet by the corner booth, order the same drinks, and laugh about how wrong that first night could have gone. One morning, Emily sipped her coffee and said, "You know, I never thought a blind date would turn into all this." Ethan chuckled. "Neither did I, but I'm glad it did." She leaned into his shoulder, quiet for a beat. "Me too." As autumn painted the city in shades of ember and rust, something unspoken settled between Ethan and Emily. It wasn't just affection anymore. It was alignment, a sense of belonging that didn't need to be defined by labels or timelines. Their moments together weren't about milestones or social media-worthy snapshots. They were about late-night walks, shared playlists, handwritten notes tucked inside books, and the ease of sitting in silence without the need to fill it. But love, real love, always gets tested. One evening, while grabbing dinner with Ethan's colleagues, a harmless comment from a coworker pulled a thread that unraveled something deeper. So Emily, the woman, asked, a smirk hiding behind her wine glass, "How does it feel to be the exception to Ethan's usual type?" The table chuckled politely. Emily smiled tightly, brushing it off. But later that night, as they walked home, she finally voiced what had been bubbling underneath the surface. "Do you ever still see me that way?" she asked. "As the exception, the anomaly in your story." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "No, you're not the exception. You're the correction. The course I should have taken a long time ago." Her eyes softened, but the insecurity lingered. And that's the nuance many people miss in stories like these, that love isn't just about overcoming first impressions. It's about unlearning decades of internalized ideals, rewiring what you thought you needed, and realizing what you actually crave: truth, safety, connection. So many of us grow up with checklists. They tell us what success looks like, what beauty looks like, what love is supposed to feel like: grand, effortless, shiny. But what no one teaches us is that love often feels like showing up when it's inconvenient, like admitting you were wrong, like choosing the same person every single day, even when the magic feels ordinary. Emily wasn't the girl Ethan had imagined. She was better, not because she checked boxes, but because she made him want to throw the list away entirely. A few months later, while sitting in the same corner booth of Luma Bean Cafe, Ethan took out a small notebook, the kind with frayed edges and doodles in the margins. He slid it across the table. Emily looked at it, puzzled. "What's this?" "It's my story," Ethan said. "The one I've been writing since we met." She opened the notebook. Inside were pages filled with moments they had shared, sketches of their coffee cups, quotes from books they discussed, memories scribbled down in his messy handwriting. In the center of the final page, he had written, "If I had to choose a life without you, or a life full of imperfections with you, I'd choose the latter every time. Because you've taught me that love isn't about getting it right the first time. It's about trying again with the right person." Emily looked up, her eyes shimmering. "You really are a writer," she whispered. "No," he smiled. "You made me one. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't some viral moment with a string quartet and flash mob. It was quiet, intentional, and real, the way their love had always been." And here's the truth that this story teaches us, a truth that so many people overlook in the age of surface-level swiping and filtered perfection. Love doesn't arrive dressed like your fantasy. It walks in when you least expect it, looking nothing like your plan, but everything like your future. Ethan and Emily remind us that people are not profiles. They are layered, complex, evolving. And sometimes the person you almost dismissed is the one who ends up rewriting your entire definition of happiness. It's easy to fall into the trap of assuming you know someone based on a picture, a story, or a stereotype. But connection lives in the spaces beyond assumptions, in the questions you ask, the silences you respect, and the grace you give when someone is brave enough to show you who they really are. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or misjudged, remember, someone else's limited perspective does not define your worth. And if you've ever done the overlooking, maybe it's time to look again. Look slower, look deeper, because sometimes the most beautiful chapters of your story begin with the pages you almost skipped. So the next time you're faced with someone who doesn't match your checklist, ask yourself, what if this isn't the wrong type, but the right story? That night, as Ethan and Emily walked home under a sky dusted with stars, he reached for her hand. No fanfare, no speeches, just two fingers brushing, then holding tight. You still think blind dates are a terrible idea, he teased. She smirked. Only when you walk in expecting to be disappointed. He grinned, pulling her closer. Lesson learned. And for once, Ethan wasn't worried about the optics, the labels, or the opinions of people who hadn't walked a mile in his shoes. He was just thankful, deeply quietly, thankful for the chance to love someone who had shown him how to be seen and how to see others. Real love doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs to be chosen, again and again. Thanks for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, made you think, consider sharing it with someone who might need it today. Subscribe our channel for more powerful story about love, self-growth, and human connection, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey.